The title of this video is From Fear to Freedom: How to Address and Overcome the Most Common Fears. There are two parts to this video. The first part is a discussion, about 20 minutes or so long, because the subject of fear is so extant that I want to talk about it first as a foundation for part two, which is a meditative process to dissolve fears. Natural selection, or survival of the fittest, is the driving force of nature. It manifests in nearly every aspect of life. It's about survival of the species, survival of the individual, survival of the country, survival of business, survival of relationships, and survival of all else that is valued. And what drives survival is fear. Fear keeps people motivated, alert, driven. Fear is on a mission to create the safest situations for itself, and yet it's always feeling insecure and unsafe. At least for humans, survival fears are ultimately self-defeating because fear itself is an energy that, when projected into the mirror universe, it creates reflections and attractions of more and more of what is feared. And it can also destroy relationships and businesses and even damage your health. On an even larger scale, it can lead to war and widespread destruction. Fear is derived from a perception of not being safe. And in an attempt to create greater security and safety for itself and those it values, it is willing to take from others, put others at risk, or cause others to suffer loss, and without a vision of the consequences. Now, I realize I'm personifying fear here a bit, and that's because there is a consciousness of fear that is composed of beliefs, perceptions, and tactics, and it also has a personality that it communicates its positions. Fear has such a simple but pure, single-minded survival instinct for safety and security, and it is so diligent in its pursuits that it cannot see any other options. It is truly on a focused mission, as if there's a binding contract that it cannot deviate from. In fact, it is the underlying force of nature, which means survival at all costs. Fear is self-perpetuating and always creating and evolving other forms of fear as a means of survival. So fear begets more fear. And since survival is the prime directive of nature, from the perspective of the ego, it is seen as good. You see, the ego sees fear as on a noble and diligent path leading to survival. But it is really just more fear to motivate survival. So fear is your ego's main tool of survival and evolution. And from a human viewpoint, the problem is that fear seems like a nearly uncontrollable animal that must be caged in order to have life continue. And so fear is feared. Now, when you think about fear and how you react to fear, you find that's what causes pain, suffering, and struggle. Well, fear would say to you, you have no idea how much I've struggled and done everything I can to help you survive, all to get you to the place where you are now. I have guided you and all of your ancestors through countless lifetimes and millions of situations. Don't tell me what you think works better and that fear doesn't work. I know fear works. Your very existence proves that fear works. So you can thank me for your survival. From one point of view, that seems to make some sense, doesn't it? Except fear is very unaware that there's another possibility. Fear operates through the ego personality. And that exists as separate from the soul or higher self. But the ego is afraid of releasing fear because fear is the main tool and friend that it is used for survival. The ego is actually a created consciousness, and it has a collection of all of your memories and all of your experiences. And the ego operates only through your senses, and it utilizes fear as the primary survival mechanism. And that is what creates a sense of vulnerability. So, the greatest fear of the ego is fear of its destruction and death. Now, that doesn't mean the ego is afraid of you dying. It's not, because it has seen you do that countless times through many lifetimes. And it knows that this life transcends a single human lifetime. But it is terrified of the prospect of being dismantled through you deeply surrendering and releasing all the components it has used to perpetuate its very existence. The ego is never really quite sure what might come along in the future that will be a threat to its very existence. So it is in a state of fearing the future all the time. It's fearing the unknown, which of course is the future. And this manifests in all sorts of fears. Fears can take a lot of different forms. Now, I'm not talking about phobias like fear of spiders or fear of heights or fear of water. Those can be pretty well effectively treated with various psychological techniques. I'm talking about a whole different class of fears. And I'm going to list a few of them so you can see the extent to how they reach into your life. These are just some of the forms that fear takes. Worry, a persistent concern about the future, which leads to stress. Insecurity, a lack of confidence that can erode success and prevent personal growth. Anxiety, overwhelming feelings of unease that can paralyze decision making. Panic, intense, sudden episodes of fear that disrupt your daily life. Doubt, second guessing yourself, undermining what can cause you to make unwise decisions. Nervousness can cause unease or even trigger a freeze response, and that can hinder all of your performances. Stress, everybody knows about that. Chronic tension that can affect both mental and physical health. Shyness, that's fear of social interactions and can limit personal and professional opportunities. Feeling embarrassed, concern over perceived social mistakes that can cause you to avoid people. Jealousy damages trust and harmony in relationships. Low self-confidence, which is a pervasive sense of inadequacy that affects every area of your life. Fear of intimacy, a reluctance to form close, meaningful relationships due to past hurt or insecurity. Fear of rejection, an excessive concern over being turned away, not liked, or not accepted, which can prevent taking necessary positive steps. Fear of loss, the dread of losing something or someone important, and that leads to neediness or avoidance. And fear of failure, a powerful fear that can prevent pursuing goals and achieving success. This is just a short list of 15 of the more than 100 forms of fear that are very common. Now, how many people do you know who have none of the forms of fear I just listed? Probably not many, if any. Unless the fear center in the brain called the amygdala has been removed, everyone feels these fears with very few exceptions. But that doesn't mean that you have to. So the question is, with all the techniques out there and nobody wanting to feel fear, Why are fears so prevalent? Why is it that fears remain mostly untouched by all of the techniques and clearing processes that people do to release them? The reason fear doesn't respond to most conscious and even subconscious attempts to clear it is because they're housed in more places than just the conscious or even subconscious minds. Now, they, of course, may live there and even use both your conscious and subconscious mind as tools to execute their fear responses. But fear exists in two additional places that you may not even be aware of. Fear is a major survival program in what's called the reptilian brain. That's also the brain stem. This is the portion of the brain that reacts like a reflex when something threatening is perceived. So before you can even have time to think about what is feared and how to respond to it, you find yourself reacting with anxiety and fear. And that is what initiates the fight or flight response. And this happens so quickly that you're likely to wonder where your reaction came from. It overtakes you like an autopilot. A fourth source of fear is in your subtle energy field. And that's the part that goes often unrecognized by conventional psychological methods. And this can include your aura and chakras. Now, there's a part of you that knows about another quality that you would like much better than fear, but you probably seem to have trouble making it work. And that is your higher self, or sometimes it's referred to as your superconscious self, or even your soul. And that has the primary characteristic of love. Fear and love exist as a polarity of opposites. You want love, but there are fears that get in the way. Now, when you meditate, you can become free of the subconscious mind and the body, and you can have the experience of transcendent love, light, and even freedom. But what all too often happens is that as soon as you open your eyes, you find yourself once again engaging in a world whose very fabric is all infused with fear, because fear is like the backlight to the substance of creation. It's present and behind everything. It's certainly evident throughout nature and creation. It drives the view of evolution being survival of the fittest. And even the word survival is infused with fear, fear of not surviving. So now even great political and spiritual leaders have admitted they have fears. But remember, someone once said that perfect love casts out fear? It's in 1 John 4:18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear expects punishment. The person who is afraid has not been made perfect in love. Now, you might be wondering, how do you do that? Because love is not easy to feel when you're feeling fear. And yet you think to yourself that at some point, fear must be let go in order to evolve. And yes, it is true, fear can be transcended. Now, I'm not talking about the kind of fear that you might feel if you're being attacked by a lion. That's a mechanism built into the human brain and the body that kicks in the natural fight flight response. I'm speaking about perceptual fears, fears like the 15 that I just listed, fears over things that are not actually even happening at the moment and projected of what might happen. Now, it is possible to shift consciousness and enter a state of realization that is almost like flipping a switch, so to speak, to another universe or another state of consciousness that's operated from a position of love. And in that place, you can continue your evolution on a higher order beyond fear. Just as you can be focused on single-minded fear, you can shift out of fear by shifting your focus to single-minded love. Fear is, after all, just an energy. And as you clear the subtle energies causing fear, love can then automatically begin filling all the places where the fear programs were. And then going further, by taking the full presence of love into every place in consciousness and sending it through your entire energy stream, you can create a shift in awareness that affects your entire life. Now, what would prevent you from making such a quantum shift into love? In other words, you know that there's a part of you that wants to make that shift. And furthermore, the higher self or soul already lives in love and knows this is where you are headed in your evolution. That this is a new idea to the ego mind, the brain, even the physical body and the subconscious mind, and every other part of you which has used fear as its primary defense mechanism to protect you. A major part of you has used fear to shield you from risky situations, cause you to avoid certain people, cause you to be cautious about relationships, cause you to be mistrusting. And those parts of you that have utilized fear regard love as weak and ineffective, and certainly a very big mistake to try to use to replace old, reliable fear. So, what does fear do? It creates walls, it creates barriers, shields, avoidance, distance from even some of the very things that you want. It creates difficulty with trusting yourself or others. But there is a more effective alternative. And so, with this awareness now, you can thank, bless, and even release the need for the fear paradigm and begin to acknowledge the desire, acceptance, and permission to welcome a love consciousness to emerge. You see, that love consciousness is already deep inside of you because it is the nature of your higher self or your soul. Now, the challenge, of course, is that there's a part of you that's not ready to let go of the fear and fully embrace the love as a new prime directive. And that's because parts of you still think that you need fear to keep you safe. But you can at least begin by extending an invitation to love at this point and begin welcoming it to replace the places that have been run by fear. And here is how this happens. First of all, you acknowledge that fear has served you in the past and brought you to the place where you are now, where you can experience connecting with something that can take care of you even better. And that is what we call love. This is really a big evolutionary step. And not many are ready to make that step, but I think you are. And the second step is to recognize that you are not the fear, and the fear is not you. You can think of it as a tool or a program that you had to use at one time to keep you safe until you are ready to let it be replaced with something better. Your soul does not feel fear, and in fact, it is incapable of fear. So when the soul merges into the fear energy patterns, the fears dissolve. And when you first start to experience this, you almost can't believe it. Your mind will wonder, where did the fear go? And the mind will even start searching for it. And it will sometimes even try to recreate it because it has been so familiar to you your entire life. And so the initial experience can create what's called cognitive dissonance until the mind realizes that the fear is no longer present. Now, the way you do this is the third step, and that is making a request and holding an intention to merge and combine all the cells of fear energy with the soul or higher self. And this is a shift in consciousness that takes you to a much higher level of human evolution. In fact, the highest evolution might not even be possible any other way because the soul and the higher self is where the direction for your evolution comes from. That is what motivates you to evolve. It is where you are going, a place of no fear. Your higher self is actually who you are, and it is also where you are heading. Now, I'm speaking here of your spiritual evolution. So you can see that fear will ultimately have to surrender itself to love at some point in your evolution. Now, next, I'm going to guide you through a process to address and dissolve common fears. I think it was important that I explain about fear, first of all, give you a little outline on how you can start replacing it. So you know what you're dealing with, and you know a direction ahead and a mechanism that can enable you to do this. So I'm going to end part one here, and part two will take you into the guided process of replacing and releasing the fears that you are currently having.